This is Pod Populi.
Podcast for the people.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
Hi again, everyone. It's Brian Howie. Welcome to the Great Love Debate, the world's #1 dating and relationship podcast. Since 2015, we got some alert this morning from one of the podcast platforms, Google Podcasts maybe, and it said we just went over like the 7 million download mark or something like that. So first of all, sorry to whichever platform sent it. I should have paid closer attention because it's nice of them to send it out and give us an alert. I just forget which one. And secondly, good job by us. We aren't the biggest podcast overall, but we're in that next tier down. We're in that next tier down of the biggest overall podcast, which is no easy feat in the world of millions of podcasts. And third, thanks to you guys, because you guys not only make up a big part of the number, you guys are the number. You make up all of that number. And that's the number that really matters. But I got to thinking about who listens to this podcast. And I'm always surprised when people I know or knew from my life at various points tell me they listen. My male guy, Mike, he listens. One of my teachers from high school, they listen. A couple friends of mine from college, married for 20-something years, they listen. I think that's great. But it makes me feel a little vulnerable, mostly because I'm not sure they're necessarily listening to the content. It's more like they're listening to me. And I know that seems like the same thing to you guys. You're probably like, well, of course they are. You're the voice. But it's not quite the same. It feels like you're a little more exposed when they're like, that's Brian's show. I don't know. That's my quirk and that's my issue. And God knows I have some issues. But one of the people I know who listened to this show is my friend John. And he was actually in the studio while I recorded a few weeks ago. He was listening and he was laughing and he was gesturing and asking me not to put him on the microphone. And I think you guys might have heard me reference him like, what do you got to say, John? And he shied away from it because it wasn't his thing. But John and I were part of a group of 4 friends. There were me and John and Frank and Dave. And a whole lot of what shaped who I am and what I do and the way I think and a whole lot of this show, The Great Love Debate, it stemmed from a lot of those days and times. And of course, and mostly, excuse me, those nights. A lot of those nights back in the day influence a lot of what I think about, good or bad, to this day. I wrote my first screenplay. It was called 3-Day Weekend, and it was based on those guys and that time and those nights. Anyway, Frank died of cancer about 10 years ago, and then Dave died of a heart condition. I don't know, something happened, and he died about 5 years ago. And we're not that old. And maybe some of those nights did eventually catch up with them, and some of them are probably catching up with me. Because those were some crazy, crazy nights. I remember when I went to see The Hangover, the movie in the theater, and I was like, so? Like, I thought that was kind of a normal Vegas experience. I wasn't that shocked by it. I probably had Tigers and Mike Tyson at some point. So anyway, when John was in here watching us record, I thought, we're the only 2 left. And I thought, this must be what it's like for Paul and Ringo. You know, John and George passed. And Paul and Ringo, they're the only 2 Beatles left. And it will be weird for one of them when they're the last man standing because people are going to say, what's it like to be the last Beatle? And I thought it would be weird for me and John if one of us were the last of our 4 friends remaining. Well, 2 weeks after I thought that, and just a few days before I'm recording this, John died suddenly. And I felt so weird that I thought that at the time that I thought it. And I feel bad that I put that out to the universe. And I was one of the first people to be alerted that he died. His brother texted me, and like some immediate family members didn't even know, but I got texted because his family knew that I had just seen him. So they thought, well, I have a pretty good handle on what's going on in his life, which isn't totally true, but I had just seen him. And part of that responsibility when somebody tells you that is you are now one of the ones who has to tell some other people. It's a weird, kind of icky, a little gossipy game of telephone when that happens, because you kind of got to let people know. And it's not a pleasant experience. And it's definitely not necessarily a role I'm best suited for. I'm not sure that's something in my strength or skill set, is alerting people about somebody passing away. But I had to think, who do I contact? And who are the most important people in his life or have been in his life? So we were not as close as we were back in the day. So my focus went from, okay, his coworkers or people like that, I'll leave that up to the family. My focus went from who are the present day people, which I thought was probably not my place, to who are the past. And I began to think about the girlfriends, his girlfriends, the people he dated. Because I've known him a long time, and there were some girlfriends. And some probably hadn't spoken to him in maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years, the young ones. And some may have left on bad terms, and some may have barely remembered their relationship. But that's where my mind goes, because that's always where my mind goes, to the relationships. So I started to figure out, who do I know and who do I have ability to get in touch with? So I started to text or message or call the ones that I had some contact with and the names I could remember. Now, surprisingly, how many he remembered? I remembered. Good job, John. He had a lot of girlfriends and they were memorable. And no matter how far in the past it was, or what the relationship consisted of, or how it ended, when someone dies, a piece of that person is also put to rest, which I think is the final closure of a relationship. So as I reached out, I could tell by the responses, not just that they were sad or upset, and a lot of them were, but that there was a memory that was now a more permanent, distant memory. It's like the period was on a sentence. So however they left things, and I didn't have great clarity on how any of them left things, time had washed away a lot of the bad, and mostly people remember the positive. He was a good guy. It was a fun time. I remember that fondly. And death has a way of doing that, of sort of wiping the slate clean while not totally erasing it. So I know that this is a bit of a sad and winding prologue, but it does lead into the crux of what I want to get into, is that what it is about relationships that bond us and keeps us together and makes us connect even when it is over. And I think that is the little things. In a way, it's the rituals and the routines and the habits and the traditions, not just what we did, which was a lot of what they thought back on, but when we did it and how we did it. And you've heard me on one of the podcasts we did about breakups. And I said that the thing that makes breakups generally so hard, at least immediately, and why it's hard to get past that person and that relationship, is the loss of those habits and that routine. That sort of schedule of the way you do things, it's suddenly off. So if you're thinking, I spoke to that person every morning at 7:45 a.m. and now I suddenly don't. That happens when somebody passes away, maybe not on a regular basis, but it also happens in a relationship. Like every day you talk to that person and then suddenly you don't. If you say, we watched HBO every Sunday night for 3 years and now they aren't sitting next to me, it's not just that absence of them in the bed, it's the absence of them in your day and in your night. It's the notes and the thoughts and the plans and the texts and the calls. Each day, same way, every time. So a breakup is a little like a death in that it won't ever be that way again. It won't ever be the same again. It's the comfort and the familiarity of the ritual and the routine that makes us feel safe. And that's what's so ultimately satisfying in a relationship. So I've taken a quick break from our relationship. I know, awkward place for a pause, but I'll explore this a bit more when we come back, because we will be back right after this. And we are back. So when you're in a relationship with someone, when they become your boyfriend, or your girlfriend, or whatever term gives you that feeling of we're together, we're in this together. That person for a brief time, even if it's only in the first few months, it becomes your family. You spend more time with them after 6 weeks of dating, I assume, than just about anyone else outside of work, and maybe even more than work, because a lot of people aren't seeing each other at work anymore. So you're spending a lot of time with this person. They become the most important of your friend circle. You see them more than you would see your mom or your dad or your brother or your sister. And it is sort of a little mini family that you are in pretty early on in a relationship. Doesn't mean you're as close as family. It means you're falling into the familiar feeling. And familiar literally has family in the word. That is the root of it. It means a close and intimate situation or relationship. And the familiar ultimately sits on a foundation of the routines. You start to learn each other. The things that make you grow and help you bond are the handful of things that are the same over and over and that get repeated. When you're not together, you fall into a pattern. This is what time we talk every morning. This is when we say goodnight. This is where we go for tapas. This is where we take our dogs out. This is what we like to watch. These are the things that make us laugh, and on and on and on. And we tend not to pay attention to them because they are routines, and routines by their very nature and definition can seem boring. So we often spend time reflecting on the big things. Oh my God, that trip to Italy, or our first anniversary celebration, or that concert that we saw. But those things fade away, or they move sort of into the background. So they were big at first, and then as you get into things, or as you look back, they do become background things. It's not the big events that define who you are as a couple. It's the minutia. It's the repetition of the rituals, day-to-day doings that form the bond, the closeness, the familiarity that you need to truly feel close with someone. So just think about that. You don't want the, I have no idea if or when he might call. That isn't really excited spontaneity. That is, what are we doing here? Where are they? How does he feel about me? That's what that is. You want the, he calls me every night before bed, and he goes to bed about the same time. That makes you feel safe. And that makes you feel like you're part of something. It makes you feel like you're together, and that makes you feel important. You are a part of his or her most basic moves and activities, and you are on their mind even during the routine stuff. That's when you're really with someone. When they aren't literally with you, when they are figuratively with you through the course of a day or an experience that you might not be sharing now, but that you want to share later. Isn't it nice to have a place as a couple that you always go to breakfast? Or if you always try new brunch places, it's really not about the new places. It's about the shared repetitive experience. On Sundays, we go to brunch. And then it's the activity more than the place or even what you're eating. It's not about that. It's like, let's try a new brunch place. It's that you go to brunch every Sunday together. Doesn't matter where. It's that you do it. You always do it Sunday after Sunday. You want that and you like that. That's not the passing of time. That's the coming together. We do this and we do this again. And we do this over and over, and it feels nice. And even though it's the same, it feels completely special every single time because this is our thing and this is what we do and this is something that we share, the two of us together. And that's why I think the women that I contacted who used to date John, there was a part of them that still felt a closeness and a lingering bond. And I think a lot of this, people probably have this with people that they dated or even their exes. They probably hadn't been in communication and they may not have even thought about him for years, but it felt familiar. And part of me talking to them felt familiar because they knew me through him, and it was a part of a time and a world and a pattern that felt familiar. For a brief time, it felt like family. He was a part of her family. I was a part of his family in a way. So we all sort of shared that, and that familiarity brought some closeness in the search for, I guess I was looking for some closure. So it wasn't about the highs and the lows and the fights or the breakup. It is more like when we look back or we look into the present of